One sound tore across Utah Valley University, and in that instant, nobody on the ground knew where it had come from. People dropped, security lunged, the event broke apart in pure panic. Charlie Kirk had been hit in the neck. He was rushed for treatment, but he would not survive. In minutes, a campaign stop became a national crime scene. The first hours were not just tragic, they were chaotic. Facts came slowly, rumors came instantly, and into that vacuum came the question that would drive the entire country. What actually happened? Tonight, we are not retelling rumors. We are rebuilding the event from what investigators said, what the footage showed, and what the public saw in real time. In the beginning, authorities deliberately held details back, not because there was nothing to say, but because every detail could affect witnesses, evidence, and the case itself. But people do not tolerate empty space for long. When the truth is incomplete, the internet starts manufacturing certainty. And that is exactly what happened here. Before the public had a clean timeline, the country had already split into competing stories. Some said coordinated political violence, some said conspiracy, others said a lone attacker. Everybody had a theory before investigators had a full path. The problem with the theory is that it feels complete. The problem with evidence is that it takes time. So the real divide in the first day was simple: what had been proven and what people desperately wanted to believe.
And one early detail changed the whole shape of the event. Investigators said it appeared to be a targeted shooting from above, from a rooftop position overlooking the crowd. That meant the story was no longer just panic at ground level. It became a reconstruction, a roof, a shot, a route, a getaway. And once social media felt too contaminated to trust, millions of people migrated towards search, timelines, and pages that looked more neutral. By the end of the year, Google's own data would show just how large the shock really was. Charlie Kirk became the #1 trending search in the United States in 2025. On Wikipedia, the page views exploded into record territory. The country was not just reacting, it was trying to verify reality. The first solid shape in the investigation was not a face, it was a position. Investigators quickly turned their attention upward toward a rooftop line above the event. But the discovery of the rooftop position instantly raised a different, more alarming question. How was a vantage point that close left completely unsecured? The answer lay in the physical setup of the event. Official reviews later mapped the perimeter, revealing a critical blind spot between the inner security ring and the outer local enforcement zones. It was not a highly sophisticated breach. It was a structural failure of the map. That single gap allowed an individual to access an elevated position with a clear line of sight, entirely unchallenged until seconds before the trigger was pulled. Once the shot was fired, the physical reality of the event was locked in. Forensic trajectory quickly confirmed what the crowd had already felt. The threat had come from a high angle, bypassing the ground-level defenses. Within seconds, the response shifted from protection to a massive tactical sweep. Local and federal units flooded the perimeter, trying to close the net around the compromised zone before the shooter could vanish. But the suspect was already moving. In the chaotic minutes that followed the gunfire, the shooter abandoned the elevated position, slipping back through the same fractured perimeter that had allowed them inside. But they did not escape without leaving a physical trail. Investigators soon recovered an abandoned weapon and ammunition in a nearby wooded area, suddenly transforming a confusing panic into a highly documented, fast-moving manhunt. This is where the reconstruction turns brutal. Not a shooter in the crowd, a distant figure above the crowd. One shot, one instant, and the entire event changed forever. After the shot, the story moved to screens. Later, investigators released footage tied to the suspect leaving the roof area, a few seconds of movement that the country replayed again and again. And while the manhunt was unfolding, the messaging was messy. For hours, the public was left inside a blur of contradictory updates, detentions, and uncertainty. And even then, investigators did not open everything to the public. Some details remained locked down, not because nothing was known, but because the case was still moving. By the end of the year, the shock had a measurable shape. Charlie Kirk became the #1 trending search in the United States in 2025.
On the day after the assassination, Wikipedia traffic surged to nearly 15 million views. Millions of people were trying to verify reality at the same time. To put that into perspective, the September 2025 surge overtook earlier benchmark spikes in public attention. This was not ordinary curiosity, it was a national data rush. But millions of people arriving at one article is not just traffic, it is a battlefield. And because Wikipedia is open, the page became a target almost instantly. People tried to force names, blame, and motives into the record before the evidence was ready. That is how digital history gets contaminated in real time. So, protections had to be deployed, not to freeze history forever, but to stop the page from being overwhelmed while the facts were still being assembled. This is what separates a modern crisis from the old broadcast era. The public no longer waits to be told history. It tries to verify history while it is still happening. That is why the public starts sorting aggressively in moments like this. Rumors out, dates in, claims out, documents in. Public memory is no longer a monument carved decades later. It is now a living surface, edited, contested, and fixed in place while the event is still fresh. But once the digital shockwave begins to settle, another question emerges. What happens to a movement when its public center is suddenly gone? When a highly centralized political organization loses its focal point, it can fracture fast. Leadership becomes damage control. In the chaotic aftermath, leadership had to be stabilized quickly. Publicly, the movement needed a new center. The memorial phase was not only about grief, it was about tone. The entire country was watching to see what emotional direction the story would take. And one of the most unexpected public notes was forgiveness, not as an erasure of the event, but as a refusal to let rage become its final language. That shift mattered because it changed the emotional script. The violence remained real, but the public language around it changed. It gave supporters a path away from immediate escalation, a way to absorb the shock without turning it into another spiral. And that's where the modern media machine locks together. Search, social platforms, and old broadcast power, all shaping the same event. Television did not disappear from the story. It simply took a different role, shaping emotional memory while the internet handled the live factual scramble. A CBS town hall with Kirk later leaned directly into that emotional memory role. In the aftermath, physical objects still mattered. Books, records, speeches, archives. They became anchors against the speed of the feed. This is the terrifying part of modern memory, the speed. Not just the speed of the news, the speed of collective meaning. In earlier eras, definitive history arrived years later. Now, the struggle over meaning begins almost instantly. And every time reality becomes unbearable, we return to the same ritual: a blank search field, a blinking cursor, and the hope that data can impose order.
No matter how fast the internet moves, the same battle begins every time. Not only what happened, but who gets to define what happened. The files are closed for today. Hit subscribe to keep the vault open, and I'll see you in the next one.